Hello, and welcome back to the Build Better Summit. We have our work cut out for us. We've had such inspiring sessions, and thanks for sticking with us through to the last one now. This is resourcing the transition to an equitable economy, and we have with us leaders in business, investment, and philanthropy who are going to share their insights on what they see on the horizon for their respective industries and organizations, and how we all can lead in transforming our economy. I'm Melanie Audette. I'm Senior Vice President at Mission Investors Exchange, and I will be moderating the session. I am a white woman of undetermined age and wearing a black sweater, sitting with a backdrop of Seattle, where I'm signing in from today, and I'm honored to be on the land of the Coast Salish people. My pronouns are her, her, and hers. Joining with me today is Kim Folsom, the Chief Executive Officer at Founders First Capital Partners, Hope Mago, Principal at HCAP Partners, Sarah Lyman, the Executive Director at the Alliance Healthcare Foundation, and Richard Tate, Executive Vice President at the California Wellness Foundation. Thank you all for joining us. Our speakers, as you'll find, have a wealth of knowledge and diversity of experiences to share with you, including launching the only minority and women-led revenue-based venture platform with $100 million in committed capital, utilizing growth capital to lower middle market companies to catalyze economic well-being in disinvested communities, and grant and impact investing strategies to deploy capital that instigates community economic development. So we'll begin with just a few questions for our speakers and get into some conversations before moving over to some Q&A. I want to invite all of you to use the chat box now, because we want to reflect on what has already happened at this summit to really put it into an area from being able to, as we were told, be a thought-provoking event that helps people think about an opportunity to consider your roles and the levers that you have. But our goal here really is to help you to leave this with some areas to take action. So thinking about your own, about the inspiration you've gotten from this summit and what you can do when you leave here. So we're going to start first with Kim Folsom from Founders First Capital Partners. Kim, let's just start with helping us to know who you are and a little bit of information about your journey here, who you stand with and behind in the communities that you serve.
Certainly. Well, I'm delighted to be here. As Melanie so graciously introduced me, I'm Kim Folsom. I'm the founder and CEO of Founders First Capital Partners. Founders First is my seventh venture. I have, prior to launching Founders First, founded, grew, exited a few tech firms for the last 25 years. And my journey was, some 40 years ago, in talking about Seattle, I, went to undergraduate school and wanted to run a company like a Microsoft. And at the time, in the 80s, as an undergrad, that was not possible as a woman of color. And so I figured out how to launch my own venture-backed company some 8 years later, and went on to launch some 6 companies and raised over 30 million in venture, but found that, as I looked to the right and left, there weren't very many women, people of color going through the same journey. And so that led me some 5 years ago to launch Founders First to help women, people of color, military veterans, LGBTQ, and those in low and moderate income areas, as well in second and third tier cities, to launch companies and overcome some of the challenges of under-resourced communities. And so with that, that's my journey coming here. And I'm based in San Diego, although we are in 4 regions. and welcome to participate in today's conversation.
Thank you, Kim. Just a little bit more detail. How does your organization support those communities? Just a little bit more.
Certainly. So we are a small business growth accelerator, and we provide direct revenue-based investment into the percentage of companies that come into our program, and then we provide advisory support on the other side. One of the significant challenges for businesses led by the diverse founders we serve is access to capital, but that's one of 5 challenges. The other is know-how to grow a business and create premium wage jobs. And then the other is execution support. Of the 6 businesses I founded, 4 of them I started in the crazy recession, so being able to survive in times like this. But the other element is actual growth capital. So we don't focus on working with startups. We work with companies that are actually, revenue generating between as low as $50,000 in annual revenues to $5 million in annual revenues, and we'll provide up to $1 million worth of revenue-based capital. That's different than equity or traditional debt. We take an interest in the revenue streams of the companies that we serve.
And in that case, Kim, then the investors are successful once the companies are successful. Is that right?
Actually, what's different between revenue-based investment and traditional debt investment is you don't have to exit in order to have a return back for the investors, because the actual investment is a royalty interest in a revenue stream. So say, for example, every dollar that of revenue is generated, 5 cents may be shared with our platform and then distributed back to our investors. So there is kind of a win-win. We have an interest in helping the companies grow their top-line revenues, because then they pay back that investment to a cap, and after that cap is realized, that ends that particular investment category. We do provide not only initial investment but follow-on investment like a traditional equity investment, but there doesn't have to be a liquidity event in order for the investor to be repaid back.
Thank you for clarifying that. And that know-how and execution support is so important for some of the guidance we've gotten from previous sessions. As an investor, you can't just drop money into a community without having that execution support. And so those services that you're providing I really appreciate that across the board. Thank you. Let's move on to Hope Mago. And Hope, I think some of your work may be complementary or overlap. Help us to understand what you're doing and the communities that you serve, who you stand with, what you believe, and help us get to know you.
Sure. Thanks, Melanie, and good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Hope Mago. My background is born and raised in Zimbabwe in Southern Africa. My major interest and love growing up was more economics, which led me to work at the central bank in Zimbabwe, more in a monetary policy role, and did some work around developmental economics, which sort of ignited my interest in how you create economic opportunity in a broad-based manner. So about 10 years ago, I had the opportunity to join HCAP Partners, and we are primarily a growth capital firm that looks to provide the resources to help scale businesses. We're based here in San Diego, and we've invested in about $300 million into 45 companies across 3 funds, with those companies supporting approximately 11,000 jobs. Now, beyond just providing capital to small businesses, one of the things we do as an impact firm is we try and figure out how we can not only help create avenue for access to capital for underserved businesses, but also we think through what are the workplace practices that are in place at the companies we invest in. And then beyond that, creating a roadmap built on 5 pillars that really focuses on how we can create a quality job for those low to moderate income employees at the companies we invest in. And so the 5 pillars of our gainful jobs approach are focused on 1, broad-based wealth creation. Secondly, opportunities for advancement. The third is a provision of sustainable wages. Then the fourth is the provision of paid sick leave. And the final pillar we look at is the implementation of wellness initiatives at the companies we work with. And then basically we're working with management over the 4 or 5 year investment period to make sure they're executing on that roadmap. And if they need additional resources or technical assistance in executing on their plan, we act as an added resource that they can lean on. So that's the quick overview on HCAP.
Thank you. That's so helpful. Can you give us just a little bit more insight into the 25 companies that you're investing in? Just what industries or what are those companies doing?
Sure. So we focus on 4 key sectors. So healthcare is a core sector that we focus on. We think there's a lot of opportunity and trends that are taking place that make healthcare an interesting place to deploy capital into. We also focus on software or technology-enabled services companies, and then business services and niche or light manufacturing. So, some of the areas we're deploying capital into are not areas where venture capital or your Main Street traditional sources of capital find interesting. So we're an alternative for those businesses that may not have a path to access traditional sources of capital.
Perfect. Thank you. Let's move now over to you, Sarah Lyman. Tell us a little bit about Alliance Healthcare, the values you stand for, issues and communities you stand with, and the systems you stand up to.
Sure. So hello, everyone. I'm Sarah Lyman. I go by she, her, hers, and I serve as the Executive Director of Alliance Healthcare Foundation, based here in San Diego. And first, I also just want to acknowledge and appreciate soon-to-be Catalyst of San Diego for convening this event today. So the sessions have been really inspiring to me, and I'm so grateful to be part of it. Alliance Healthcare Foundation, we're a regional private health conversion foundation, and we serve 2 counties, San Diego and Imperial counties. And, we recognize that our current system, the way that people access capital, grant, debt, venture, otherwise, is not distributed equitably in our country. And there's huge access gaps that are contributing to the inequities that we see in our communities, which are layered on top of generations of oppression, in particular for communities of color, and continue to result in the accumulation of wealth and concentration of wealth held by a small percentage of people and individuals. And so as both a grant maker and also an impact investor, we try to blend different types of capital to fund individuals, organizations, efforts that aren't receiving support through traditional markets. So just a few examples, like in the impact investment space, we're an investor in Mission-Driven Finance's Advanced 2025 strategy, which is essentially a financing tool for the growth of small businesses, social enterprises, nonprofits that benefit the community in some way, whether that's access to health, education, housing. And by design, the fund is filling gaps where other traditional financing is not made available and supporting organizations often led by and supporting marginalized communities. We also use our impact investment tool to support, for example, we made an investment earlier this year in maybe a more traditional kind of startup venture company, but our dollars allowed them to expand into the Medicaid market, which wasn't sort of as attractive, and putting air quotes here, from a profit generating perspective. And so there are other investors, it wouldn't have been a priority if they didn't have running room from folks like us to say, this is a priority. And that, we've also provided bridge capital for mission-driven companies to scale up or retool, weather the gaps, that we're all experiencing right now through COVID. And then, I think right now too, we're a healthcare foundation, but we know that if we don't get upstream and, tackle economic disparities, we're not going to be successful at achieving our mission. And there's a very clear and direct correlation between health and wealth. So as part of our exploration about how we can support economic mobility and security with a really explicit racial equity lens, we're looking at ways that we can catalyze impact capital to support things like home ownership and employee ownership for majority BIPOC populations as key drivers of wealth generation. It's early, but we're actively exploring investments in both those places. And then kind of the last area, we're also a grant maker. And so we've activated grant dollars in places that are, we hope, helping contribute to a more inclusive economy, whether that's through supporting small Black-owned businesses during COVID relief, or our long-standing, we have supported innovation through our Innovation Initiative, or I2 program, for many, many years, paused this year because of the current climate. But through that program, we provide, we call it venture philanthropy in the form of grants of up to $1 million in one organization to help adequately resource promising innovation by social entrepreneurs who are working to transform systems and create sustainable interventions that will advance health and wellness for marginalized populations. Too often these organizations are either unable to access traditional venture capital because maybe the long-term profitability projections aren't strong enough, or maybe it's too early stage and so it's deemed risky. So since 2017, over 80% of our funding through that program has been committed to organizations led by people of color and primarily serving people of color. And there's also a lot of kind of capacity building and technical expertise that goes along with that long-term partnership. And then the last thing I'll say, just in all of this work, we really want to be additive. So if traditional financing mechanisms work for a project, awesome. Let's capitalize on that. Like most of the panelists here, I think we're trying to find ways to provide capital where it's missing.
Thank you so much. As a foundation, a healthcare conversion foundation, it seems like you're working in really, really innovative ways. You're catalyzing new markets, for instance, for the startup venture that you mentioned funding, having them expand into Medicare. You're really being catalytic in your community. And I'm wondering if there's any one thing you can point to as a foundation that has lifted the restrictions of historic philanthropy, of how we've always worked as foundations. What is there something you would attribute that to that others could kind of
Yeah, I mean, I think, first of all, we still have a long way to go. So by no means are we the end of the road or the gold star. But I think, especially when we talk about investing, there's this push-pull in foundation spaces, especially related to risk. So something might feel more risky when we anchor the value of the preservation of our endowment ahead of, community social impact, for example, or even on par with that value. But when you anchor the social impact value more heavily, the conversation more quickly shifts to, well, what are the risks if we don't make this investment? What's the risk from the social impact side if we don't step up? Recognizing it might mean we're giving up something financially. So we're not perfect at all in this push-pull, but I think the more practice and comfort we get with making impact investments, the mystery of it sort of becomes less of a barrier. And I think the partnerships and sort of the relational element to the work helps, we're able to pivot together with partners on the ground, which actually creates a much stronger safety net for success.
Thank you so much. Let's move to you, Richard. You're with California Wellness Foundation. You're also focused on issues of health or social determinants of health and race. Tell us a little bit about you and your organization and what you stand for, what you focus on.
I'll start with myself. My name is Richard Tate. I'm Executive Vice President of the California Wellness Foundation, and my pronouns are he, him, and his. And I'm a biracial gay man, and I'm coming to you today from my home office in Oakland, California, where it's actually lovely today. It's raining. We need the water, as we all know. And my lights are flashing a little bit, so I don't know what that's about. I'm not being dramatic. I think it has to do with the weather. But I come to philanthropy after a long and varied career. I worked in the private sector for many years, in everything from journalism to higher education, And right before I entered philanthropy, I was working in biotech and big pharma in an executive communications capacity. I joined philanthropy through an interesting side door. I sometimes say I worked for many years with Yo Midyars, the founder of eBay, and his wife on their private philanthropy, their personal philanthropy, before joining Cal Wellness, which, similar to Sarah's organization, is a health conversion foundation. We are a statewide institution, and we primarily make grants, but in the last 5 years have really committed ourselves to using not just our grant making budget, but our endowment to really advance the issues that we support and care about. We have a pretty broad definition of health. As you mentioned, Melanie, the social determinants of health, which is just a fancy way of saying that we believe where you live, where you work, your ability to access a quality education, all of those things determine your ability to be healthy and live well. We're in the middle of a 10-year advancing wellness grant-making strategy, and one of the things that's emerged pretty clearly is, as Sarah referenced, the health-wealth connection. And we've really begun to focus in the final 5 years of this particular strategy on how we can reinforce not just the economic safety net for people in California, but also expand opportunities. And for that, that means that means not only investing through our grant making, but also through our endowment investments as well. We're at the early part of that journey and happy to share how that work is evolving for us. The last thing that I'll say is that we believe pretty deeply that that wellness requires racial justice. And that has been a big focus of the refinement of our strategies in this particular advancing wellness period for the foundation. And by that, I mean, we've gotten fairly explicit about the communities that we are looking to support and serve. Black and brown communities, immigrant communities, the folks who tend to be left behind, and certainly the folks, when you talk about access to capital, are not often the first people at the table. So as we have begun to continue to advance our work in this area, issues of equity and diversity and inclusion are front and center, and race as well.
Thank you, Richard. Can you give us a little bit more information about the areas that you're investing in that help to support community-driven movement building? Just give us a little bit of a smorgasbord of some of the things that are you're doing either recently or historically.
Sure. Well, our grant making is I wouldn't say unique, but it's interesting. We've committed to doing about 50% of our work focused on direct services and 50% of our work on policy advocacy. So that is the legacy of the foundation. It's actually part of our incorporation articles is the commitment to be supporting both sides of the coin, if you will. And what that looks like for us in terms of the organizations that we fund. We support community power building and voice, so a lot of civic engagement activities, everything ranging from the census to integrated voter engagement. But in the portfolio of work that we refer to as economic security and dignity, we are supporting organizations like the UCLA Labor Center. We just actually made a significant grant to some work that they're doing in the inland region and in San Diego to support Black workers in those areas. So that's one example. In our investment portfolio, we're supporting a range of community development, financial institutions, and looking to support small businesses across the state. And again, that's a newer part of our work, but those are just a couple of examples on both the grant making side and then also the investment side.
Great. Thank you so much, Richard. I'd like to invite folks in the audience or who are viewing to include some questions in the chat for our speakers. We really want this to be as interactive as possible. One of the goals really of this session is to link together resources, right? We're talking about resources to activate this work, and resources are not just financial. Obviously, we've heard from folks here already about the different types of capital that they bring. Part of that is community capital, convening capital, as well as financial capital. On the other side of the equation, we think about what kind of risk and return we get from our investments, including our grants, impact investments, and the use of every type of asset that we have. And we've heard in this summit about really activating your supply chain and thinking about how you do your work internally as an organization and how that reflects your mission and values. And so I welcome a conversation now with the audience to help us to understand how you in particular feel like you can bring the unique value of where you stand, whatever sector you're in. If you're in the public sector, the private sector, in academia doing research, or really on the ground like these investors and intermediary organizations that we have. And we'll try and weave those questions in because we're about halfway through our session already. So we want to make sure we get to what's on your mind. So I'm going to circle back to Kim again. And Kim, to help us to understand how your work interacts with investors. So you are, I believe, both raising money and also investing dollars in community. So help us to understand, what that means for you, how you connect either across sectors or with philanthropy or individuals who are investing in your company.
Okay, let me try that again. So Founders First is a national platform. What we're seeking to address is for where, there is a lot of, I should say, take a step back. The market has changed in the last, I would say, 5 years. As a founder who's, a woman of color who's, started a company in the 90s, where there weren't very many, the market has significantly changed, especially in the last 5 years. Women of color are the fastest growing group that are starting businesses. In fact, according to American Express State of Women Business, on a weekly basis, 750 women of color are starting a net new business. In the last 5 years, there have been programs that have been able to take and help these women take their businesses from ideation stage to, a side hustle, $25,000 in annual revenues. But being able to go beyond that to be an actual premium wage job for them and their communities is really what we're seeking to do with Founders First, and not just exclusively with women of color. And we support white women, we support military veterans that happen to be white guys that are in second and third tier cities. But there's a whole changing shift with entrepreneurship from these underserved communities is really where we're focused. And our asset class that we're building, so one is to provide a low dilutive, flexible capital to help these companies grow, not start, grow. There's lots of really great accelerators around that will help them take their idea to something, to about 25,000. But we're looking to take those businesses that are capable to be 7- and 8-figure businesses. But the type of capital that we provide is a different and new asset class in itself. There are a lot of, in the last, again, 5 years or so, ESG related investment, initiatives that folks want to go through and do either a, impact investment that's going to have an impact in some specific community. But they want to do it and be able to measure that impact as far as the outcome. That's really what we're doing with Founders First. It's a two-sided platform. On the one side, there's the work we do to help grow these companies. But on the second side, we provide a platform such that impact investors are able to deploy that capital could be nationally, it could be regionally, to be able to affect, premium wage job creation within a specific community. And we have been able to attract, support from recently and some national foundations. But, for the better part of 4 years, it was grinding it out with, high net worth individuals and family offices that were concerned about, the existing capital stack was not addressing this, the fastest growing entrepreneurs. And so, Founders First was, created as a platform to be able to address that directly.
You've talked about national foundations and high net worth individuals and family offices being investors into your organization. Are there other types of entities that could be investors in you?
Oh, those that have an interest in actually increasing addressing the social and racial economic gap. We want folks to not just, write a check, but that they're really to actually be aligned with the mission of where we're seeking to go. So I'm certain there's, a number of people that have that interest.
Thank you. We have a question in the chat about what does it mean to be a premium wage job? And I think, Hope, that might be a good question for you to answer. What are your thoughts on what it means to be a premium wage job?
Sure. We look at it a little differently because we're thinking of creating a quality job, because the majority of employees at the companies we invest in are earning low to moderate income wages or reside in low to moderate income zip codes. And so really for us, the thought process in our investment thesis is, how do we move you out of sort of the current scenario you're in and help you create wealth and hopefully, a higher earning position within the company you work with. And so we're really looking at, a couple of factors that we think are the foundations of a quality job. So one's a sustainable wage, which in most cases is typically going to be higher than minimum wage. We use the MIT Living Wage Indicator as a baseline for that. We also look at opportunities for advancement. So how do we move you from a shop floor worker to a supervisor, hopefully to a manager within that company, and give you a path to create a career within the sector you're in, right? So that includes provision of education benefits, provision of training programs, creating a path so people know that, hey, there's a way to rise up within the organization. It means opening up any positions internally first before going to recruit outside candidates. We're also looking at provision of long-term wealth, right? So how do we help everyone participate in a facility or a program to create wealth, whether it's a stock option plan, it's a bonus pool. One of the things we've started putting in place is what we call a transaction bonus pool. So it's a way of us recognizing that the wealth and the value that's taking place within these companies is being driven by the employees, and that they should participate when we have a successful liquidity event, right? So we'll carve out a portion of the proceeds from that event, and every employee will participate in that bonus pool. It's also looking at the provision of paid sick days, right? Which for many low to moderate income employees, they don't have access to that. So when we come in, we want that to be part of the company's policy when we're working with them to avoid issues such as presenteeism. And then it's also implementing wellness initiatives. So how do we drive more preventive healthcare programs across the companies we're working with, and encourage people to actively think about a healthy mindset and really be proactive, right? So instead of being reactive to health issues, being proactive across the workforce. And there's a lot of different programs we tend to roll out in the companies we work with. And then a key provision of everything we do is at the end of every year, we run an employee engagement survey. And really, it's a way for us to get feedback from the team around are the things we're implementing relevant to them, right? it's easy for us sitting here in San Diego to think we know everything, but we think it's important that the employees participate in developing some of these impact themes that we then implement, and getting their feedback and input into what's working and what's not working is a key component of that.
So it sounds like the answer to that question is really more holistic. We heard in the last session the need to really change systems and the way things work, and the question may really be how to not maybe focus as much on the premium wage, but a premium quality of life, and changing the structures so that this quality of life also creates wealth that can be generational wealth for all. So I really appreciate that.
Melanie, mind if I also answer that question?
Yeah, please.
Because we do measure it by a premium wage. And first and foremost, we start with the founder. We look at a premium wage job is one where they're generating $50,000 or more annually. They are able to provide benefits for themselves. They're able to save for retirement and have insurance and have those types of coverage. And that's really the first gap that happens with this kind of entrepreneurial journey. Is there's a number of initiatives that are helping people launch businesses, but it's keeping them in a poverty situation on a continuous basis. So the first founder that we're looking to help provide a premium wage for is the founder of the business, and teaching them what type of business they need to have to allow them to sustain that premium living wage, and how they're able to grow that beyond that. So that's one thing that we benchmark with our programs before they start, and we measure their performance on a quarterly basis and give them access to resources such that they're able to achieve that goal.
That's excellent. Thank you so much, Kim. In thinking about where you can or want to invest, this takes conversations within organizations like the Healthcare Conversion Foundations we have on the phone, represented by Sarah and Richard. And I wanted to ask you about what some of those conversations look like or feel like within your organizations, and specifically around a question in the chat that was around balancing the importance of funding direct to communities or grassroots with strategies through intermediaries or ready to scale businesses. Would either one of you like to pick up on that question?
Sure. I'll start, Sarah, and you can chime in. I love the question because that's really the work. Those of us who are in organizations and institutions making decisions around how capital flows, it really comes down to the quality of the conversations we're willing to have, even if they're uncomfortable. So I'll give a couple of concrete examples. As a Health Conversion Foundation, as a grant-making institution, when we think about our grant-making strategies, we're always thinking about communities and audience. When I first joined the foundation, we were launching women's initiatives, 2 initiatives focused on the health of women in particular. And we were looking at a couple of different areas that disproportionately impact women. HIV, AIDS, and STIs, unfortunately, still continue to disproportionately impact women, as well as reentry, issues around employment and reentry for women who have been formerly incarcerated. And I mention it because I remember the conversation very clearly. We were looking at the data around women who are impacted by these issues. And it was very, very clear that Black women suffer the most. Second to that, Latinas suffer in these kinds of conditions. These are the folks who are impacted disproportionately by these issues. And yet it was really challenging. We ultimately got there to move our staff and board to being explicit in naming these women's initiatives as initiatives specifically focused on women of color, Black and brown women. And I mention it because it was a really important conversation to have. It determined the direction of our funding, the kinds of opportunities that we were going to pursue, So our willingness to talk about race candidly and directly was really essential to putting shape to that effort. On the investment side, similarly, we've in our investment journey, we've launched a diverse asset managers program, and we've applied at this point about $100 million of our endowment toward this project to put capital into the hands of diverse asset managers. It may not surprise you that we quickly got to the conversation to ask ourselves, what do we mean by diverse? What does that actually mean? And what's the data that we're using to determine whether or not these managers fit the criteria for that program? And again, another conversation where we talked about gender, we talked about race, and in the boardroom and on the investment committee, had some pretty candid discussions around our willingness to prioritize those issues. So I name it in part because I think they're challenging conversations for any organization to have. You're talking about money, you're talking about race. That can be really tricky, but it's so essential to being clear about the impact that you want to have and to really shape the work that is ultimately going to result from that. So that a couple of examples from my organization, but Sarah, welcome you to add to that.
No, that's very helpful. And I think, for us, sort of similarly, we're evolving, we're growing, we're learning, and we've been pretty actively engaging in really deep conversations around racial equity and white supremacy and what it means to be an anti-racist organization and how white supremacy shows up in our work, daily in our boardrooms and our staff. And so by no means are we, done with that work. I don't know that we ever will be, but it's definitely become more comfortable. And so the question gets raised a lot more proactively by a variety of folks, maybe more so than it had, previously. And, to the specific question around how do you balance needing to invest in community grassroots efforts versus intermediaries and scalable businesses, to that question, I would say that just like there's a spectrum of funding streams, one-time grants, multi-year grants, general operating loans, equity, debt, revenue-based investments, matching those to the work and the needs of the organization is just as important as making the capital available. To Kim's point earlier, access to capital doesn't necessarily mean it's the right capital to help a business or an idea scale or grow or thrive. And so that's something I think we balance too. And then, I think I mentioned this earlier, but as a healthcare foundation, shifting more into the economic mobility and security space, recognizing that we have to get upstream. For some folks, it's uncomfortable, right? Like we're used to being really directly involved in the healthcare sector. We're talking about, our federally qualified health clinics and the work that they provide and other interventions that are squarely in healthcare. And so it's an evolution to sort of get to the place where we truly are able to, maybe we'll always do this, but sort of reemphasize the connection between wealth and health. And I think part of the genesis of our innovation initiative and why the core of that program is grant funding is because we understand that sort of our current, economic systems are exploitive in many ways. And then also just, we're always asking ourselves, and we're doing a lot of this deep work internally today, is just, looking at our own data. Where's our money going and who's it not going to? What's the diversity of the leadership within our, grant pool versus our impact investment pool? And does that seem right-sized? And are we really, how can we broaden our network so that we're being approached with more diverse, inclusive ideas to be investors in versus, sort of having to be seeking those out? Like, how do we become more embedded, I guess, in some of these spaces where there's excellent work that needs to be supported and it doesn't always get to us? So what is that saying about our, approachability, accessibility, et cetera? So yeah, lots of internal reckoning and analysis all the time.
We, foundations often have a theory of change. Well, they have a clear mission typically, and they have theories of change. You mentioned, we may not ever be done our work, but we always want to see progress in our work. And unfortunately, every foundation is different. Every investor is different. And in order to make change, there has to be some kind of collectivity or coordination of resources in order to make the change at scale that we've heard on this summit that's really needed. So I'm wondering if you could identify, and I'll throw this up for anybody actually, what do you think is missing that philanthropic asset owners might be able to do or point to or encourage that would help us to scale up this work? I know, Richard, you mentioned, working on the ground. We've talked about grassroots and investing into businesses and people. But is there anything that you can imagine that we could do, whether that's connecting the dot with public resources? Any kind of advice? What do you think is missing?
Well, it's not new or novel, but you just alluded to it, Melanie. I think collaboration, and as Sarah has talked quite a bit about, pushing ourselves beyond where we're comfortable or what we know. Yeah, I'm putting a little bit of words into your mouth, Sarah, but it's almost this idea that we've got so many different tools that we could be using, and we should be thinking about all of them and deploying them as thoughtfully as we can. So, Melanie, I think the opportunity is, and someone mentioned it in the chat, is, even on this call, we sort of see all of these synergies. Now the next step is for us to be willing to sort of follow up and say, okay, how can we collaborate and do this work together? Part of it is showing up in places and spaces like these. And it's, being willing to push ourselves to go beyond kind of the easy thing, which sometimes is just to sit in our own organizations, in our offices, and make decisions that are very clear to us. But knowing that if we really want to reach impact and impact at scale, we need to think about who else is in this space. I'll give a concrete example again from my organization. We just went through, as I've alluded to, kind of a midpoint assessment of a 10-year strategy. We're just 5 years in, but a really explicit part of that was to say, who else is in this space? And so in the economic security and dignity portfolio, which is, again, how we think about the work that we're talking about today in the context of our broader portfolio, part of that was saying, who else is doing this work and how can we partner with them? And so I'll just, give shouts out to the James Irvine Foundation and the Walter and Elise Haas Fund, the San Francisco Foundation, the Stupsky Foundation. These are other organizations that are making investments. To Sarah's point around, maybe we don't know who we should be supporting or funding, and how do we address that? This is one way to do that. Who are you working with? Who are you funding? Who are we not accessing that we could or should be? Again, it's an overly simplistic way of describing it, perhaps, but collaboration and a willingness to push ourselves and take greater risks.
Yeah, if I can.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Completely want to echo that. And, I think two things I would add. One is just approaching this work with humility, recognizing sometimes we get in our own organizational swim lanes and we want to, sort of check the box or do something good and not necessarily take credit for it, but have that be part of our institutional legacy, right? And so sometimes, to me, especially in the philanthropic sector, that tail wags the dog, where we should be anchoring the impact together, right? And the ultimate goals rather than who gets credit or who's, funding the biggest piece of something. So just like one thing, I think philanthropy has its work cut out for itself in shifting. And the other thing to your question about how do we scale, I don't know exactly how to make this happen. I think there's some movement in recent months, given kind of our climate, but institutional investors are market shapers, especially in the VC space. And so thinking about how they can really take more of a leadership role in helping close the race and gender gaps in venture capital. Diversity in senior leadership. Did you guys lose my back? Okay. Just we know that diverse leadership generates better financial performance, stronger innovation, higher levels of success, but you wouldn't assume that based on the way that the VC industry invests currently. So if the institutional investors were able to use their leverage, foundations, insurance companies, family offices, endowments, to hold VC fund managers accountable to reporting on gender and racial diversity, to prioritize fund managers who already are doing that, I think that could go a long way in sort of shaping the field.
Melanie, can I add one thing to that? I think one thing that's worked for us as a fund is we actually set up a impact advisory board, which is made up of our larger foundation partners, so Ford Foundation, NEKC, Northwest Area Foundation, and a host of other foundations. And we really thought, why don't we leverage all these, organizations that have done a lot of field building work around quality jobs, around economic development, and leverage that skill set, right? Instead of us trying to reinvent the wheel in some of these areas. And I think that's actually pushed us in evolving our impact approach, every year, because every time we meet with them quarterly, but every time we have a conversation, they're thinking like, what else should we be looking at, right? What else should we be thinking of? And I think just having everyone around the table and just having those conversations for us has been a great, way of just leveraging those resources.
Yeah, and organizations like Catalyst now, San Diego Grantmakers, prior to today, I think, or this week, are organizations that can help make those cross-sector connections. It sounds like you're already doing a lot of that in San Diego. I'm wondering, too, if there is more room for corporations, large national or global corporations, to play a role in the space, in those collaborations that you talked about, Richard. Are you seeing any movement or opportunities to invest cash or be guarantors to unleash more capital in communities? Any sense of that from you or anyone else?
I see huge opportunity. I mean, when you just think about the scale of resources and the influence that corporations have on economic prosperity and opportunity, it's vast. So I do think that there's opportunity. How we access that opportunity, how we engage, how we begin to collaborate, that's probably the bigger challenge. But I think it is true, generally speaking, when you think about corporate, not just corporate giving, but corporate, social responsibility, which is a bit of a term of art, but the way that companies think about how they engage and support with communities, I think that that's evolving too. I think the social compact between corporations and communities is evolving. The consumers, people, and employees are demanding different things from corporations. We have had some examples of corporations coming to us, particularly this year around the racial justice uprisings after George Floyd's murder, people making commitments around racial equity and racial justice issues, and quite frankly, looking for guidance, support, advice, and looking to leverage relationships that private philanthropy may have, foundations may have, others may have, in order to direct some of those dollars. So I think part of it is us being willing, each of us from our different perspectives, to be sharing what we're learning, what we know, and trust that in sharing those insights, both the good, the bad, things that work, things that don't, to be of service to others, like corporations who are trying to have meaningful impact in communities. That's one opportunity space that has begun to percolate for us. And that just means, I've gotten some calls this year, folks who said, my company just pledged $100 million over the next 5 years. What do we do? And the opportunity to say, here are 5 organizations that you should talk to, and here are, a few things that we've learned that you should be thinking about. So yes, big opportunity with corporations. I think it's interesting to think both about corporate giving, but also employees and how you activate employees within corporations. And again, I think this notion of collaboration and finding ways to share what we know across sectors, because I think sometimes corporations feel like, well, we don't do community work, we don't know how to do that. And sometimes, as foundations, we think, oh, we don't really know how to engage with business and, what they care about. So some of us getting over ourselves and sort of being willing to come to the table and share what we know is, I think, essential. But lots of opportunity there. I love that question.
If I could add to that, I think just as Richard mentioned, the beyond the philanthropy and the people element, I would say is the supply chain or procurement issue. Corporations can make a huge impact with regards to allocating, their spend on an ongoing basis to new diverse founders. Many of their customer bases are diverse folks, but you don't see that happening with regards to their vendor bases. And if that doesn't happen, all of this stuff is pretty mute. I mean, being able to take in, whatever the number of net new vendors would be quite significant. There has been an institution to allow for, minority supplier diversity, but generally that's been working with very large minority supplier organizations, but those businesses that are less than 5 million in annual revenues, especially those less than a million in revenues, are not connected to the supply chain of those organizations. So that's one will make a significant difference. Because the other element is that diverse founder-led businesses have very large diverse employee bases. And that is going to be a way of growing premium wage jobs amongst diverse founder-led businesses at a much faster pace than you're going to see large corporations change the diversity makeup of their business.
That's a wonderful point. And are you and your organization being looked to, or I guess would you be willing to, if you're not already, as a resource, Kim, if a global or national corporation wanted to understand better the type of work that you're doing with the businesses that you're working with?
Most definitely. In fact, some of the other regions that we're expanding into, we are very involved with an initiative called A Right to Start. We actually are creating our own kind of flavor of that. 5% to raise, if you will, and to encourage corporations and quasi-government entities to allocate 5% of their spend with new diverse founder-led businesses. Not, new that they're startups, but, the fact that they should add new vendors on an ongoing basis. Generally, the excuse has been, small vendors require so much hand-holding and supervision. And so in other regions, we are working on initiatives with them to do that. And then the other element is there's other supporting economic drivers. Most all cities like San Diego has, resources allocated to employment development. But when you think about these small businesses less than 5 million, the resources to teach them how to create premium wage jobs is something that's very, very important. And in other regions, kind of on par with like the Amazon 50,000 job, sweepstakes that many people went through. There's some cities that have used similar initiatives, and they've been able to create, many more than 50,000 net new small business jobs by, allocating these 5% either from, company spend, government spend, resources to help people create new jobs, and then the other is economic development resources.
Do you see, any of you actually, do you see opportunities to be a bridge or identify leaders who are able to bridge these conversations and collaborations across sectors? And I'm thinking in particular, the public sector. It sounds like there's already work going on in San Diego that involves public philanthropic partnerships. And there is a lot of money flowing from states into communities in response to the COVID pandemic. Curious if you're thinking, Richard, maybe you mentioned collaborations. Are you thinking that there are more opportunities to cross that divide between public sector and philanthropy?
Absolutely. I would offer from our position, it's not just an opportunity, it's imperative. I think if we want to have the kind of impact that we aspire to address these structural issues of racism and inequality, we have to be partnering with government as a key component of those structures and institutions that continue to perpetuate some of these problems. So I'll give you a couple of examples. One is just how we're organizing ourselves. One thing that's become clear to us in the last 5 years is that we have to go beyond even just thinking about our dollars. I am at the California Wellness Foundation because I was invited to come in and start a public affairs team, thinking about policy and institutional voice, communications, how we make visible our point of view and the values that we stand for, and how we advocate from our position as a private foundation for those issues. We continue to evolve our thinking on that. We are embarking on a more intentional effort around government relations, specifically cultivating relationship and being in partnership with government leaders, elected officials, government administrators at agencies that address issues across the state, local leaders. It's just a reflection of our belief that we're going to have to partner with government and access those exponentially greater resources and dollars and direct them in ways that are in alignment with the values that we care about in order to have impact. So that is kind of just an example of how we're thinking about organizing ourselves and our strategy. We're investing dollars to build those kinds of relationships. And we are looking for grant-making opportunities and investment opportunities where we are investing alongside the government. So the state has committed, as you mentioned, substantial dollars to the COVID response. We've been involved in a couple of efforts ranging from contact tracing and public health initiatives where we're looking to invest dollars that then are unlocking federal dollars or state dollars to address very specific issues to contain or to try to address the pandemic. And we continue to look for those places where it is not us independently funding a single organization to do work on the ground. That's important, but in terms of balance, we're also looking for those opportunities where we can come together with other partners and with government partners and sort of say, what collectively can we do? How can we organize philanthropy to provide dollars that sit alongside public dollars in order to advance issues? So not only is it an opportunity, I think it's going to be essential if we want to make meaningful impact.
Yeah, oftentimes the federal grants need matching dollars in order to be deployed in communities, and that sounds like a good opportunity for some philanthropic asset owners. Sarah, did you want to add on at all around that question, or another one?
Yeah, that was very beautifully articulated and sort of ditto. That's all I would say.
So we only have about 5 more minutes left in our conversation. I wanted to go back around the room and starting with you, Hope. And if there was anything you would want to say, either to an entity that's like yours, a community that you serve, or an investor of any type, what kind of question would you have, or what kind of advice would you want to give in activating or bringing more resources to your work or to the work of those on the call?
Sure. I think it's been, we've been an impact investor for almost 20 years now. It's been an interesting journey. I remember 10 years ago, half our investors were worried how much time we're spending on impact. They only cared about return. So seeing the evolution of the conversations and all the capital moving into the space gives me a lot of hope for the future around where opportunities will continue to come and flourish from. So again, for me, collaboration is important, leveraging, any of the other panelists, their resources, their knowledge. Knowledge exchange is a key focus for us. And so the more we can continue to have these conversations and sort of pull some of that into what we're doing, I feel like that's important in just continuing to move what we're trying to achieve forward.
Kim, can we move to you? What kind of advice or question would you have?
Well, first of all, thanks so much for providing me the opportunity to participate and get to know the folks on the panel. I appreciate this opportunity. Additionally, I want to share that I can't emphasize enough a couple points. One, going beyond philanthropy and the people issue as well as the procurement issue are really critical. Without those things, we're going to be revisiting this issue all the time. What's critical is being able to move beyond providing the fish, but teaching folks how to fish so that we can stop visiting this issue every 3, 5, 10 years without actually, the other is with regards to actual, advancement of economic equity with regards to the diverse population. It's not an optional thing anymore. Again, without that really being addressed, it's going to be something that's going to keep happening like a recurring appointment. Much of the underlying issues related to social and racial unrest has to do with economic inequalities. And so it's got to be able to move beyond the conversation to actually results and outcomes, and holding people accountable for those is really critical. And then the last is collaboration. It's not going to happen by just, keeping folks at silos or annual conversations. It's got to be, a regular, collaborations. That's where, the changes have been so effective in other regions, is because there is a collaboration to make results happen.
Perfect. Thank you. Sarah?
Sure. I guess my very practical advice would be, for those of you who control or have influence over some kind of capital resource, it could be an endowment, a set of vendor contracts, like we talked about, corporate investments, loan funds. Maybe team up with someone internally who balances your skill set, whether they bring financial expertise or more programmatic experience, and just brainstorm together. What could you do within your sphere of influence to be more inclusive with your capital? Look at your data, disaggregate it. Where's your money going currently? Maybe, perhaps more importantly, where is it not going? Make a plan, even if it feels like you're starting small. I think sometimes we get frozen in the status quo because we put so much pressure on ourselves knowing that we need to make radical change. That's actually the end result we need. And just to lift up and emphasize some of the comments this morning by Ronnie Galvin from the Democracy Collaborative around the need for reparative systems and the idea that reparations really need to take center stage. And in addition, as part of sort of getting unfrozen and ushering in reconstruction, there are immediate practical steps and a real window of opportunity now that we have the power to advocate for and implement within our spheres of influence, within our own organizations. So I think, to me, that's our collective call to action. Roll up our sleeves and find concrete ways, big and small, to shift our systems to be more inclusive.
Wonderful. Thank you. Richard, final words?
What a great conversation. And I just, Kim, I just really appreciate your caution and guidance that, if we continue to focus on giving alone, we're not really making the long-term change that we're after. And there's one thing that you said that really stood out to me, a good reminder, that even as we think about that kind of work, there typically are, the bigger fish, or the fishermen who, get a lot of attention, and there are these smaller businesses, these smaller folks that we really need to be thinking about supporting as well. So I just really appreciate those comments. I think what I would leave folks with is be brave, have the tough conversations within your organizations and your teams to think about how you can achieve the impact that you want to see. And that means talking about race. That means talking about power dynamics and inequality. That means talking about whether you're stuck in, an old way of thinking because it's comfortable and it's not really having the kind of impact that you want. I think Sarah said, thinking about not only what do we have to lose, but what's the risk of not taking action? Now really is the time. And if you're going to be brave, be bold, go big, make a significant investment, make a big decision to invest in ways that are going to shift some of these dynamics. I'm all for experimentation. I'm all for pilots and testing, but be bold, make a meaningful investment to make change. And then I'm just going to take my own medicine and say, in terms of collaboration, I'm going to say, be in touch. If there's anything that I or the California Wellness Foundation can do to share what we're learning, what we're doing with you and your organizations as you chart your way forward, please don't hesitate to reach out. I think my colleague, Jeff Kim, who I work with closely at the foundation, he's the program director who leads our economic dignity and security portfolio. Reach out to him as well. We both are happy to be in touch. I'm at rtate@calwellness.org, and always happy to share what we're doing.
Thank you so much. I know I speak for everyone who's listening and watching this. I just can't thank you enough. The generosity that you've shown by being here today and sharing your insights, Richard, Sarah, Kim, and Hope. This whole summit has been incredible, and it's not over. Thank you. I can't wait to share with you the next presentation here on the Build Better Summit, and it's Khalil Blue with social workers. And so stay tuned for that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
What's up? I'm Khalil Blue. I am the founder and producing artistic director of the Social Workers in Agency 515. I'm always excited to participate in equity work, which I think we truly define as relationship work. And anytime that we gather to wrestle with concepts like equity, like we're really here to do like role identification and figure out like what piece of this work is mine and what am I committed to, and what conversations do I need to have, what relationships do I need to build, how can I show up, and I'm excited about contributing to a world where people are invited to show up in fullness and in curiosity and creativity and in collaboration and compassion and companionship and all of the things that are equity producing and joy generating and really the spaces in which we need to be like building these conversations from. I think we love to conflate equity into this really big, lofty topic. I think we want to make it like huge and inaccessible, and because I think it keeps us from owning the fact that that we have absolutely every tool that we need, and that equity is a thing that we could have right now if we choose it. It's easy for us to talk about equity as a lofty goal, this space and ideal, rather than engaging with it directly as something that we actively undermine every day. And I think that we have to get, really, really clear on what our work is, right? We have to like ask ourselves if equity is truly our goal, like if that's really the thing that we're working towards, and like if so, is it possible for us to not work in conflict but work through it, okay? To do what we can to ensure that like something is truly moved in this moment, in every moment we gather to build equity together. I'm excited about a version of us that like really leans into that.
We are the minds who hold the visions of a world that we're all dying to live in. So it is up to us to be the difference in the world that we want to see. You see, real change, it starts as an idea, and then it grows on us all. It is up to us to plant the seeds, so it matters what you say, and it matters what you do. Because if you plant the seeds in the right places, you have the power to grow up in a world that will one day grow from you. You see, I wrote a goodbye letter today. I said sayonara to the old me in my usual ways. I've been moving out of darkness and enjoying the rays, thinking about making some changes in a beautiful way. So I've been spending some time with my reflection. I've been celebrating all of the nuances in my complexion, and I am grateful for this buttermilk and honey. I'm grateful for these freckles, for these better to kiss you with, they lovely. I've been celebrating you too, sitting with all of the things that we've been growing through, and I believe that it'll help us stand a little taller, stand a little more tolerant, move beyond binaries, shift systems with the pace of culture, y'all. It is crazy that we're still treating people different for their color, still behaving off our assumptions, but won't get to know each other. You see, my nana taught me something that I often spread around, that in some places we are all one people, 500 shades of brown, and some are lighter and some are darker, some are bigger, some are smaller, some are thinner, some are thicker, some potato and some potato, and some of us are fly. And others have yet to discover how to use their wings, but we're all sharing some piece of the same sky and all flying towards the same dreams of equality. And we must acknowledge that in this country, we're not all treated the same. We must lean away from our tendency to spin hate in circles, stop pointing and passing blame. We must learn to embrace each other's experiences, to get curious about our flaws. We must be accountable to our missteps, bridge our distances, change our laws. We have got to build connections, to live with some intention, to be vulnerable, reframe our minds, revisit what we have learned to think is normal. Y'all, there is nothing stopping us from building a better world today. We are well aware of the things that we need to fix in the places where we get in our own ways, but now it is our decision to create the world that we envision, a place where all people feel seen and heard and safe to play their role. So please, don't let this moment pass, keeping us stuck in our past. The seed is already planted. Now it's our responsibility to grow.
Hello, everybody. Congratulations, you made it. Wasn't that just the perfect way to end our Build Better Summit today? I just have chills because Khalil is such a brilliant artist, but also because I love being part of this. You all are so important. And I think in the piece we just heard, Khalil said it best: we are the minds that hold the visions, and there is nothing stopping us from building a better world today. In my job, I get to work with collaboration every day, and so I was so happy to hear us close on a note of collaboration and unity. And as we look into the future, our economy can work for all of us. That is what I heard today. But we have to acknowledge that some have more than others, that systems are built for those in power, and that we all benefit when we undo that. We started the day with a conversation about reparations and a restorative economy. We got to long-term investment of time, of trust, of relationship. And ultimately, I want to echo what Richard closed us on, this idea that we have to redefine the notion of risk. Sarah, I think, actually said that. And then go for it. Push ourselves to take more risks, because that is the only way we will get into the future that we imagine. I think it's possible that we'll be joined by Eduardo Velasquez from the regional EDC. There he is. Hey, Eduardo, welcome. Thank you for closing the day out with us.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thanks, Megan. Well, hello, everyone. You made it, as Megan said. Thanks for tuning in and for staying on throughout the day. A lot of good content today. We heard about some foundational elements for an inclusive economy, the various investments that business and philanthropy are making to advance an inclusive economy, and some exciting and innovative partnerships, I think, that are already happening here in San Diego. So a lot of good stuff. For me, the biggest takeaway is that while it will take time to correct the policies and the systems that have built a legacy of inequity in the region, we do have the tools to build a better San Diego now. This pandemic has shown that it has adversely impacted people that are already those struggling. You know, it's adversely, disproportionately impacted people of color, low-wage workers, small businesses the most. And as we look toward recovery, it's important that we're intentional. Every past economic recovery before this one has actually widened inequality. And we know that we need to get this recovery right. We know that a strong economy needs three fundamental things in order to function. That's skilled talent, quality jobs, and thriving households. This means making sure that we have a strong local talent pipeline. We need the youth that are growing up here today to be equipped to meet the demands of tomorrow. And tomorrow's workforce looks very different from today's. It also means making sure that small businesses, which employ 60% of our workforce, can actually compete. We need to connect them to local small, we need to connect our local small businesses to large buyers, like anchor institutions. You heard a lot about that today. We also need to support diverse founders in high growth industries. It also means making sure that the families living in San Diego can actually afford to do so. We need more housing, of course, but we also need better transportation options. And I think the pandemic has definitely further highlighted that we need better childcare options and greater internet connectivity. There's a lot of development that's happening in the region, more than half a dozen large-scale projects coming to our region that have the potential to transform. It's important that those include the infrastructure that our economy needs. I think it's not hyperbolic to say that the stakes could not be any higher. We have to get this recovery right. We must rebuild an economy that is more resilient than before. And we look forward to working together with all of you to make sure that prosperity reaches more people in San Diego. So thank you all. Appreciate you tuning in today. I'll turn it back over to Megan.
Thank you, Eduardo. Yeah, you said it. We have to make this place livable for everybody. We've taken so much, and now's our time to give back. So just a final huge thank you to our wonderful speakers. Thank you to all of you who've stuck with us throughout the day, commented, and we know we'll be linked arm in arm with as we go forward to build a better San Diego. This is a time when, yes, I'm going to do it. This is a time when we are all catalysts for a better San Diego and Imperial County region. We've got this. We love you. We need you. Stay safe and have a great evening. Bye-bye.